The German officers who received their orders on October 1st, 1944, were not afraid. They had every reason not to be. Aachen was Charlemagne's city, the ancient capital of the First Reich, the symbolic cradle of German civilization, and Berlin had made the strategic calculus brutally simple: hold it or die inside it. Colonel Gerhard Wilck, commanding the garrison of roughly 5,000 troops dug into 12 centuries of stone and rubble, had received a personal directive from Hitler himself. The city would not fall. The Americans, those factory workers and farm boys who had been bleeding for every hedgerow in Normandy, were about to learn what it cost to come for something the Reich considered sacred. What made that confidence reasonable, at least on paper, was Aachen's terrain. The city wasn't open ground. It was a fortress by geography and by design, a dense urban grid of reinforced apartment blocks, medieval walls, ancient cathedral stone, and interconnected cellars that could swallow infantry advances whole. German doctrine had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of urban attrition fight. Every window was a firing position. Every basement was a strong point. Wehrmacht veterans who had ground Soviet forces to dust in Stalingrad's rubble believed they understood what happened when Americans tried to push through a fortified city block by block. They bled, they hesitated, they called for artillery and waited for someone else to move first. Wilck's men were already in position, already stocked, already fortified. The 246th Volksgrenadier Division held the interior. SS and Luftwaffe field units reinforced the flanks. When the Americans came, they would come into a grinder. They did not hesitate. The 30th Infantry Division and the 1st Infantry Division, the big red one, had been closing the encirclement ring around Aachen since late September. By October 10th, the corridor was sealed. There would be no relief column. The American ultimatum delivered to Wilck was precise and cold: surrender or face total destruction.
Wilck's written reply cited his oath to the Führer and the sacred duty of every German soldier to defend the Reich's soil.
Translation: they were going to make the Americans come in and take it. Staff Sergeant Jake Lindsay of the 26th Infantry Regiment didn't need to read the German reply. He could hear what it meant when the first assault companies pushed into Aachen's northeastern districts on October 13th and the buildings opened up. Machine gun positions were recessed into interior rooms, firing through holes knocked in sidewalls, not windows, so muzzle flash was invisible from the street. Mortars were registered on every intersection. The Germans had been in these positions for weeks. They knew exactly where the American infantry would have to cross to advance, and they had pre-planned fires on every one of those points. The 26th Infantry's advance ground forward in increments measured in single buildings, sometimes single floors. A rifle squad would blow a hole through a shared wall rather than use a door. Doors were booby-trapped, stairwells were covered, and every natural choke point had been turned into a kill zone. Engineers moved with the infantry and used beehive demolition charges and bazookas to punch entry points into the flanks of defended structures. It was construction site warfare conducted under fire, with M4 Sherman tanks rolling up to ground floor windows and firing point blank into reinforced rooms while infantry breached from the opposite wall. The Shermans that German doctrine had dismissed as undergunned and under-armored were, in this environment, devastating. The German command watching from the city's interior sent increasingly urgent messages eastward. The relief force, the 116th Panzer Division and elements of the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division hammered at the encirclement corridor from outside. For 6 days, between October 15th and 21st, they threw repeated armor and infantry assaults against the 30th Infantry Division's positions at Würselen, trying to punch a corridor through to Wilck's garrison. The 30th held. Every German attempt to crack the ring was absorbed, chewed up, and stopped. The relief that Wilck's men had been counting on was not coming. Inside the city, the tempo was merciless. The 1st Battalion, 26th Infantry, cleared the Quellenhof Hotel, Aachen's premier pre-war luxury establishment, now a layered German strongpoint, floor by floor over the course of 2 days. The grand ballrooms and dining halls became charnel houses.
German soldiers fighting from behind overturned tables and shattered marble columns held each room until they were either dead or driven into the floor below. American soldiers who had entered the war as clerks, mechanics, and high school students were now executing room-clearing drills in a five-star hotel with submachine guns and fragmentation grenades. They did not stop. By October 18th, Wilck had consolidated his surviving forces into the northern quarter of the city. The communications he was sending to Army Group B had gone from confident to desperate. He reported the loss of 80% of his original defensive positions. He reported ammunition shortages. He reported that the American artillery, which had been systematically dismantling every identified strongpoint with direct and observed indirect fire, had destroyed his ability to maintain coherent defensive lines. The city he had promised to hold to the last was being reduced around him, block by block, in a way his doctrine had told him Americans could not sustain.
What German doctrine had failed to account for was the specific adaptation the Big Red One had undergone since North Africa and Sicily. These were not green troops encountering urban combat for the first time. The NCO Corps of the 26th Infantry had been killing in built-up terrain for 2 years. They had learned in Tunisia that the natural American tendency to call for fire support and wait had to be replaced with immediate, violent interior action that kept the enemy off balance before he could consolidate. In Aachen, that lesson compounded. The Americans weren't fighting the way Wilck's briefings had said they would fight. They were inside his positions faster than his reinforcement timelines could respond, and every attempt to re-establish a coherent line was being met with another breach through another wall. The collapse, when it accelerated, was total. By October 20th, Wilck's command post in the basement of a damaged building near the city center had been reduced to a fighting perimeter of less than 3 city blocks. His communications to higher command were intermittent. His casualties were catastrophic. Of the roughly 5,000 men who had begun the defense, somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 German soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured during the battle, with American forces taking approximately 1,200 prisoners in the final days alone. American casualties for the entire operation numbered around 1,350 killed and wounded, a figure that stunned German analysts who had predicted the urban terrain would impose far heavier costs. On October 21, 1944, Gerhard Wilck surrendered. He was the first German commander to surrender a German city to Allied forces. He was captured in the basement of a building that American infantry had worked down to him floor by floor, the same way they had worked through everything else in Aachen. When he emerged, he reportedly said that the Americans had fought in a way that violated every assumption his command had made about their capabilities. That wasn't a compliment. It was an after-action report. Aachen cost the Germans a sacred symbol, a functional defensive anchor on the Siegfried Line's northern approach, and, most critically, the belief that prepared urban terrain could neutralize American infantry. It could not. The men who took it room by room had just proven that. Aachen wasn't just a city. It was the moment the Reich learned that its sacred ground could be taken, street by street, room, by soldiers it had dismissed as incapable of that kind of fight. The Germans brought doctrine. The Americans brought the lesson that doctrine fails when the enemy refuses to read it. If this story deserves to be remembered, subscribe and share it with someone who thinks wars are won by the side that was most confident going in.